Champagne glasses clinked like death knells inside the grand ballroom. High society vultures circled a woman whose only crime was loving a coward. They mocked her size, stripped her dignity, and laughed, until the city's most dangerous man stepped through the velvet doors to make them choke on their cruel words. Chantal Edwards stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the guest bedroom of her shared Upper East Side penthouse, smoothing the heavy emerald silk of her custom evening gown over her hips. She was a woman who took up space, and for most of her 28 years, she had done so unapologetically. A size 18 with a brilliant mind, Chantal was a senior forensic accountant at a top-tier private wealth firm. She spent her days unraveling complex offshore trusts and exposing the hidden assets of billionaires. She was smart, successful, and fiercely independent. But tonight, staring into the glass, an unfamiliar knot of dread twisted in her stomach. The heavy silk hugged her voluptuous curves, falling elegantly to the floor. It was a breathtaking piece, commissioned specifically for the Harrington Foundation's annual winter gala, hosted at the Pierre, an iconic luxury hotel overlooking Central Park. Yet, no matter how exquisite the craftsmanship, Chantal could not shake the suffocating feeling that she was stepping onto a battlefield armed with nothing but chiffon and false confidence. "Are you nearly ready?" a voice called out, cutting through her anxious thoughts. Preston Harrington appeared in the doorway, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke tuxedo. Preston was the heir to Harrington Global, a man who possessed the kind of generational wealth that insulated him from the harsher realities of life. When they first met at a charity silent auction 10 months ago, he had been utterly captivated by her sharp wit and radiant confidence. He had pursued her relentlessly, showering her with affection and grand gestures. But as the honeymoon phase faded, and the reality of integrating Chantal into his high society world loomed, his charm had slowly curdled into something insidious. Preston's gaze swept over her. There was no warmth in his eyes, no flicker of admiration. Instead, his brow furrowed in a slight, critical wince. A microaggression Chantal had become intimately familiar with over the past 3 months. "It's very bright," Preston noted, his tone clipped. "Are you certain that cut is the most flattering choice, Chantal? My mother was quite specific about the dress code being understated elegance. We don't want to draw the wrong kind of attention." Chantal felt a familiar sting of humiliation prick the back of her neck. "It's dark emerald, Preston, and it fits perfectly. The tailor in Soho spent 3 weeks getting the draping exactly right." "Right. Well, let's just hope it photographs well from the correct angles," he sighed, checking his Rolex. "Come along. We cannot be late. The entire board of directors will be seated at our table." The ride down Fifth Avenue, in the back of Preston's chauffeur-driven Bentley, was suffocatingly quiet. Chantal stared out the tinted window at the blurring city lights, her mind replaying the subtle, chipping erosion of her self-esteem. It had started with small things. Preston casually leaving brochures for exclusive private nutritionists on the kitchen island, suggesting they skip their favorite Italian restaurant in favor of a raw juice bar because he worried about her joints. Then came the accidental gifts of designer clothes 2 sizes too small, accompanied by a tight smile and a dismissive, "Oh, I just assumed you were slimming down for the summer." He had never explicitly called her fat, but he didn't need to. In his world, words were weapons best kept sheathed in passive aggression. As the car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Pierre, the flashing bulbs of paparazzi cameras briefly blinded them. Preston's hand clamped around the small of Chantal's back, not in a gesture of affection, but of rigid control. He guided her through the gilded revolving doors, his posture stiffening the moment they entered the sprawling lobby. The grand ballroom was a cathedral of extreme wealth. Enormous crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting a warm, glittering light over hundreds of Manhattan's elite. Women who looked like they survived strictly on martinis and spite glided across the floor in slender designer columns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasting truffles, and quiet judgment. As Chantal and Preston made their way toward the VIP section at the front of the room, Chantal could feel the eyes on her. It wasn't the appreciative stares she was used to receiving in her own circles. It was the cold, calculating assessment of predators evaluating a remarkably out-of-place prey. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they passed. Eyes darted to her waistline, to her hips, to the generous curve of her bust, and then back up to Preston with expressions of poorly concealed pity. "Chin up," Preston hissed through a fake smile, nodding to a passing senator. "And please, Chantal, let me do the talking tonight." They reached table 1, situated directly in front of the grand stage. Sitting at the head of the table was Madeline Harrington, Preston's mother. Madeline was a terrifyingly perfectly preserved woman in her early 60s, her skin pulled taut over sharp cheekbones, her posture rigid as an iron rod. She was the undisputed matriarch of the Harrington Empire, and she had made her disdain for Chantal abundantly clear from the moment they met. Madeline's icy blue eyes locked onto Chantal as she approached. A slow, venomous smile spread across her lips. The trap was set. The dinner service began with a meticulous, synchronized precision that felt more like a military drill than a celebration. Waiters in white gloves descended upon table 1, placing delicate porcelain plates carrying microscopic portions of seared scallops and microgreens in front of the guests. Chantal sat rigidly beside Preston. Across from her sat Madeline, flanked by a prominent judge and a wealthy socialite named Eleanor Vanderbilt. The conversation around the table was an impenetrable wall of trust funds, summer homes in the Hamptons, and polo club politics. Chantal, despite her vast intelligence and professional success, was effectively shut out. Whenever she attempted to contribute, her words were met with polite but icy silence before the conversation seamlessly pivoted back to a topic she couldn't possibly participate in. As the main course, a sliver of Wagyu beef drowned in a rich, dark reduction was served, Madeline finally turned her full, devastating attention to Chantal. "Chantal, darling," Madeline began, her voice loud enough to carry over the gentle hum of the string quartet playing in the corner. "I must admit, I am constantly surprised by your appetite." The table abruptly went silent. Forks hovered mid-air. Chantal swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Excuse me, Madeline." Madeline picked up her wine glass, her manicured fingers tapping the crystal. "Well, it's just that in our circle, women tend to be a bit more disciplined. Health is wealth, as they say. But then again, you don't come from our world, do you? I suppose self-control is a luxury of the refined." A few muffled snickers erupted from the adjacent tables, where people had blatantly stopped their own conversations to eavesdrop on the drama at table 1. "I run 5 miles a week, and my vitals are perfectly healthy, Madeline," Chantal replied, trying to keep her voice level, though she felt the burning prickle of tears threatening her eyes. "My size has no bearing on my self-control, nor my refinement." Eleanor Vanderbilt let out a dry, rattling laugh. "Oh, the modern body positivity movement. How delightfully quaint. Tell me, Chantal, does this positivity extend to the tailor who had to source all that extra fabric for your gown? It's a lovely color, dear. Truly. Such a brave choice to wear something so visible." Chantal turned her head, looking desperately at Preston. "Defend me," her eyes pleaded. "Say something. Do something." Preston was staring down at his plate, his face flushed an ugly, mottled red. He refused to meet her gaze. Instead, he reached for his scotch, taking a long, cowardly drag. "Preston," Madeline pressed, sensing her son's weakness and leaning in for the kill. "You really must reconsider this little charity project of yours. It reflects poorly on the firm. Clients look at her, and they look at you, and they wonder if you have the judgment required to lead Harrington Global. An executive needs a wife who can fit into the social mold, not one who breaks the chairs." The cruelty of the words hung suspended in the air. It was a direct, brutal strike, devoid of any high society subtlety. Several people outright laughed. Chantal's chest tightened so painfully she could hardly draw a breath. She waited for Preston to slam his fist on the table. She waited for him to stand up, to take her hand, to tell his mother to go to hell, and to walk her out of this toxic masquerade. Preston finally looked up. He looked at his mother's expectant, commanding face. Then he looked at the other powerful elites sitting at the table, all waiting to see if he would side with an outsider or conform to his pedigree. Lastly, he looked at Chantal, his eyes filled with a mixture of resentment and profound embarrassment. "I know, Mother," Preston muttered, his voice carrying clearly across the sudden hush of the immediate tables. "She's too fat for our family. It was a mistake bringing her." The words struck Chantal with the physical force of a sledgehammer. The air rushed out of her lungs. Complete and total betrayal. The surrounding guests didn't even bother to hide their amusement anymore. Vicious, sneering smiles stretched across their faces. They looked at her as if she were a circus animal that had just failed a trick. Chantal's hands trembled violently. She placed her linen napkin on the table, the fight completely draining out of her. She was surrounded by millions of dollars of wealth, yet she had never felt so utterly degraded and worthless in her entire life. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the polished marble floor. She was going to run. She was going to flee into the New York night and never look back. But before Chantal could fully stand, a deafening sound echoed through the grand ballroom. Bang! The colossal, heavy mahogany double doors at the entrance of the ballroom didn't just open. They were shoved violently apart, slamming against the plaster walls with a force that rattled the nearest chandeliers. The string quartet squeaked to a horrifying halt. The ambient chatter of 300 elite socialites died instantly, replaced by a terrified, suffocating silence. Standing in the threshold was a man who commanded the room before he even took a single step inside. He was towering, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a bespoke midnight black Italian suit that looked sharper than a straight razor. His face was chiseled from marble, striking and rugged, with dark eyes that possessed the terrifying, dead-calm intensity of a man deciding who to ruin first. Behind him stood 4 massive men in dark suits, their hands resting casually, yet dangerously, near the lapels of their jackets. It was Gabriel Lombardi. Even the most sheltered, arrogant, old-money snob in Manhattan knew that name. Gabriel Lombardi wasn't just wealthy. He was the apex predator of the city's underworld. He was the head of the Lombardi Syndicate, a man who had forcefully legitimized his empire over the last decade. He owned the unions, he owned the ports, and more importantly for the Harringtons, his shadow banks held the secret, massive debts that were currently keeping Harrington Global from catastrophic bankruptcy. He was a man who existed above the law and beyond polite society. A collective shiver ran through the ballroom. Madeline Harrington's face drained of all color, her arrogant sneer vanishing into a mask of pure terror. Preston froze, his Scotch glass trembling in his hand. Gabriel's dark, lethal gaze swept over the frozen crowd. He didn't look at the politicians, the socialites, or the terrified waitstaff. His eyes locked directly onto table 1. With slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps, Gabriel began to walk down the center aisle. The crowd literally parted for him, people practically climbing over each other to scramble out of his path. The silence was so profound that the only sound in the cavernous room was the rhythmic, ominous click of Gabriel's leather shoes against the marble floor. He stopped directly behind Preston's chair. The Harrington heir looked like he was going to vomit. Madeline was hyperventilating quietly, but Gabriel didn't look at Preston. He didn't look at Madeline. Gabriel slowly turned his gaze, his terrifying, cold expression instantly softening into something remarkably tender as he looked down at Chantal. He observed her trembling frame, the unshed tears gleaming in her eyes, and the cruel, mocking audience surrounding her. Gabriel reached out, his large, warm hand gently engulfing Chantal's trembling one. He lifted her knuckles to his lips and pressed a soft, lingering kiss against her skin, a gesture of absolute reverence that sent a shock wave of disbelief through the silent ballroom. "Forgive my interruption, Mia Regina." Gabriel's voice was a deep, resonant rumble that carried effortlessly through the dead quiet room. He kept his eyes locked softly on Chantal, though his next words were a death sentence for everyone else at the table. "But I believe I just heard some pathetic, dying vermin disrespecting my future wife." The ballroom held its breath, suspended in a vacuum of absolute shock. Madeline Harrington's perfectly sculpted jaw went slack, her haughty demeanor crumbling into ash. Preston remained frozen, staring at Gabriel Lombardi's massive hand gently holding Chantal's, his brain failing to process the surreal nightmare unfolding before him. "Future wife?" Preston finally stammered, his voice cracking like a terrified adolescent. Gabriel's eyes slowly shifted from Chantal to Preston. The warmth that had just illuminated the Mafia boss's face vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory darkness that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. He released Chantal's hand just long enough to step forward, grabbing the back of Preston's chair. "Did I stutter, Harrington?" Gabriel's voice was dangerously quiet. He leaned down, his face inches from Preston's sweating forehead. "I asked if I just heard a pathetic, dying vermin disrespecting the woman who is going to wear my ring." "Mr. Lombardi," Madeline interjected, her voice trembling violently as she attempted to salvage her family's dignity. "There must be some misunderstanding. This woman is, well, she is Preston's +1. A temporary arrangement. We were merely—" "Shut your mouth!" Gabriel snapped without even looking at her. The command cracked like a whip. Madeline physically recoiled, pressing her back against her chair. Gabriel straightened up, his towering presence casting a long, dark shadow over the Harrington matriarch. "Your family has made a career out of illusions, Madeline. You sit here in your rented hotel, wearing jewelry financed on credit, eating food you can barely afford, and you dare to judge the worth of a woman who possesses more brilliance and beauty in her little finger than your entire bloodline." Murmurs erupted from the back of the room. The elites of Manhattan were smelling blood in the water. Preston tried to stand, his knees knocking against the table. "Gabriel, please, listen. The Harrington firm is dead," Gabriel stated flatly. The words echoed through the ballroom, absolute and fatal. "Did you really think I didn't know? Did you think I was just a silent creditor, holding your family's bad paper out of the goodness of my heart?" Gabriel reached inside his jacket and pulled out a folded sheaf of documents. He tossed them onto Preston's plate, right over the pathetic sliver of Wagyu beef. "I bought your debts, Preston." Gabriel smiled, but it was a terrifying, feral thing. "All of them. Your father's gambling markers, your mother's exorbitant personal loans, the leveraged buyouts that went belly up. As of 6 o'clock this evening, Lombardi Holdings owns Harrington Global. I own this table. I own the chair you're sitting in." Preston's face went paper white. Madeline let out a strangled gasp, clutching her diamond necklace as if she were having a heart attack. "You brought her here to humiliate her." Gabriel's voice rose, vibrating with suppressed violence. He gestured toward Chantal, who was watching him with wide, astonished eyes. "You looked at a goddess, a woman of substance, and you tried to make her feel small because you are a weak, incompetent coward who is terrified of a woman who takes up the space she rightfully deserves. You think she is too fat for your family. Your family is nothing but a rotting corpse I am going to bury tomorrow morning." Eleanor Vanderbilt, the wealthy socialite who had laughed earlier, tried to quietly push her chair back and slip away. "Sit down, Eleanor," Gabriel ordered, without turning around. Eleanor froze and dropped back into her seat, trembling. Gabriel turned his full attention back to Chantal. The darkness melted away again, his dark eyes sweeping over her emerald gown with undeniable, burning hunger. He didn't see a woman who needed to hide. He saw a masterpiece that demanded to be worshipped. "The dress is magnificent," Gabriel murmured, offering his hand to her once more. "But the company is unworthy of you. Are you ready to leave, Chantal?" Chantal stared at the large, scarred hand offered to her. Her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was a practical woman, a forensic accountant who relied on logic and numbers. None of this made sense. She didn't know Gabriel Lombardi. She had never spoken to him. Yet this terrifying, powerful man had just single-handedly dismantled her tormentors and laid an empire at her feet. She looked at Preston, who was now quietly sobbing into his napkin, a broken, pathetic shell of the snob he had been 10 minutes ago. She looked at Madeline, whose eyes were wide with the realization of her absolute ruin. A fierce, glorious sense of liberation swelled inside Chantal's chest. She didn't just take Gabriel's hand. She gripped it firmly. "Yes," Chantal said, her voice clear and steady, ringing out through the silent ballroom. "I am absolutely ready to leave." Gabriel's lips curved into a genuine, breathtaking smile. He gently pulled her up, wrapping a protective, possessive arm around her thick, curved waist. He didn't try to hide her body. He anchored her against his side, presenting her to the room as his most prized possession. "Enjoy the dinner, Harrington," Gabriel threw over his shoulder as he guided Chantal away from the table. "It's the last meal you'll ever have that I pay for." Together, the Mafia boss and the forensic accountant walked back up the center aisle. No one dared to whisper. No one dared to laugh. The high society vultures kept their eyes glued to the floor, terrified of meeting Gabriel Lombardi's gaze. Chantal held her head high, the emerald silk of her gown sweeping triumphantly across the marble floor, leaving the ashes of her old life behind. The cold winter air hit Chantal's face as they stepped out of the Pierre. A fleet of black SUVs idled at the curb. Gabriel's men quickly formed a perimeter, shielding them from the frantic flashes of paparazzi who had sensed the commotion. Gabriel ushered Chantal into the back of a heavily armored Maybach, climbing in beside her and pulling the door shut. The heavy thud of the door sealed them in a world of rich leather, sound-proofed glass, and intoxicating masculine cologne. The engine purred, and the motorcade pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the glittering nightmare of the hotel behind. For a long moment, there was only the hum of the tires against the asphalt. The adrenaline that had carried Chantal out of the ballroom began to crash, leaving her shaking. Gabriel reached over, opening a compartment and pulling out a crystal decanter of amber liquid. He poured a small amount into a glass and pressed it into her trembling hands. "Drink. It will settle your nerves," he instructed softly. Chantal took a sip. The whiskey burned beautifully down her throat, grounding her. She took a deep breath, clutching the glass, and finally turned to look at the man sitting beside her in the dim light of the cabin. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice wavering between awe and suspicion. "I mean, I know who you are. Everyone knows who Gabriel Lombardi is. But why did you do that? And why did you call me your future wife? I don't even know you." Gabriel leaned back against the leather seat, his dark eyes tracing the lush curve of her cheek, down to the slope of her neck, and lingering unapologetically on the generous swell of her cleavage before returning to her eyes. "I know you, Chantal Edwards," Gabriel said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent a shiver straight down her spine. "I've known you for 6 months. Chantal frowned in confusion. 6 months? How? My syndicate employs some of the best hackers in the world to keep an eye on federal investigations and high-level corporate audits," Gabriel explained, casually resting his arm on the back of the seat behind her. 6 months ago, one of my guys flagged a senior forensic accountant at a private wealth firm who was tearing through offshore shell companies like a wrecking ball. You were auditing a rival of mine. I started reading your reports. Your mind is terrifyingly beautiful, Chantal. You see patterns where other people see chaos. Chantal blinked, utterly stunned. "You were reading my case files?" "I started with your files," Gabriel confessed, his gaze turning intense. "Then I wanted to see the woman behind the genius. I had my men follow you. I saw you sitting in coffee shops, eating exactly what you wanted, laughing loudly, taking up space in a world that constantly tells women like you to shrink. I was captivated. I am a man who deals in power, Chantal, and I have never seen anything more powerful than a woman who is comfortable in her own skin." A flush crept up Chantal's neck. "But Preston, Preston is a blind fool," Gabriel growled, his jaw tightening at the mention of the name. "When I saw you with him, I knew what he was doing. Men like him, they acquire strong women to break them down. It makes them feel big. I watched him try to whittle you away, to make you conform to his pathetic, starved society standards. I bought Harrington Global's debt 3 months ago just to have leverage to destroy him when the time was right." "You bought a multinational firm just to ruin my boyfriend?" Chantal asked, her mind reeling at the sheer magnitude of the manipulation. "He wasn't your boyfriend." "He was a parasite," Gabriel corrected smoothly. He shifted closer, closing the distance between them until Chantal could feel the heat radiating off his large body. "And tonight, when my men told me he brought you to that viper's nest wearing that dress, I knew he was going to try and humiliate you to appease his mother. I wasn't going to let that happen." Gabriel gently took the whiskey glass from her hands, setting it aside. He reached up, his large, rough fingertips softly tracing the line of her jaw. "They sneered at you," Gabriel whispered, his eyes dropping to her lips. "They said you were too big. But they don't understand what a real man craves. I don't want skin and bones to hide behind. I want a queen who commands the room. I want every soft, thick, beautiful curve of you. I want the brilliant mind that destroys billionaires. You aren't too fat, Chantal. You are abundant, and you are exactly what I have been looking for." Tears pricked Chantal's eyes, not from humiliation this time, but from an overwhelming rush of validation. For months, she had been made to feel monstrous, wrong, and shameful. Now the most dangerous man in the city was looking at her as if she were the Holy Grail. "You called me your future wife," Chantal whispered, her heart hammering wildly as Gabriel's thumb brushed across her lower lip. "That was just a show to scare them, right?" Gabriel leaned in, his mouth hovering mere millimeters from hers. "I never bluff, Mia Regina. I destroyed the Harrington Empire tonight as my dowry. The ring is currently being custom cut in Antwerp. You can take all the time you need to get to know me, to let me prove my devotion to you. But make no mistake." He closed the final distance, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was both bruisingly dominant and achingly tender. It was a promise sealed in fire and velvet. Chantal gasped against his mouth, her hands instinctively coming up to grip the lapels of his suit as he pulled her plush body flush against his hard, muscular frame. "You are mine," Gabriel finished against her lips, his hands claiming the heavy flare of her hips. "And anyone who ever makes you feel less than perfect will answer to me." As the Maybach glided through the neon-lit streets of Manhattan, Chantal sank into the embrace of the Mafia king. The gilded core of high society had shattered, and in its place, a dark, fiercely protective emperor had risen to shield her. She was a woman who took up space, and finally, she had found a man who built a kingdom big enough to hold her. Did Chantal's fiery exit and Gabriel's ultimate revenge leave you breathless? Everyone deserves someone who sees their true worth and fights for them. If you loved this dramatic mafia romance and want more stories of brilliant, curvy queens finding their fierce protectors, hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling audio dramas. Drop a comment below. What would you have said to Madeline? See you in the next story.